Now, where we're going to hear from Selena Deckelmann about how to reach out to local teachers, or why you should and how to. This is a half-hour session, so it'll be 25 minutes, then 5 minutes of questions, hopefully. So please welcome Selena.
Thanks a lot. Okay, so that bit.ly URL are the slides for this talk. I am linking to a few different things, so if you want to grab those links as I go through, you're welcome to have at that. So I keep sort of harping on this idea that we need to connect with teachers, and when I say teachers, I mostly mean K through 12 teachers, just to set a little context for what I'm talking about. And as I was thinking about, how I came to decide that I really wanted more K through 12 teachers in my life. I wanted to get help from them in the kind of teaching that I was doing for PyLadies, which is mostly about teaching adults. I realized that this was kind of how I thought about this problem initially. And basically, I thought of, kids coming from parents, which seems normal and natural, I guess. And then the series of influences, we got the family, the society, the peers, the teachers, and then the school, and then out at the other end, magically, Python programmers pop out, right? This is kind of how I really thought about things for a long time. And I'm gonna, most of the talk today is gonna be about these leaky parts of this pipeline, these assumptions and ideas that people end up becoming ingrained, like math makes me anxious. That one starts pretty early. Another one is that computer science is boring and irrelevant, and that has a pretty significant impact on whether or not people ever decide to try to learn how to program. Another one is that computer science is for white boys, and there's quite a bit of research that's been done in the last 10 to 20 years about this issue. And finally, there's a specific issue that affects Python, which is that people believe that there aren't any jobs in FOSS. And that probably will come as a surprise to a lot of people in the room, because a lot of us are employed to write Python for a living, but there are a lot of people that believe that that's just not possible. So, but this really only addresses that point at which people are in school or they get out of school. And really, there's a lot more to this problem. I'm not really going to address all of that, but I just want to point out that there's sort of this bigger donut out there of issues involving people getting into and out of the computer science industry. And the thing that I want to point out about that donut is that it's pretty leaky. But the thing that I fundamentally believe about the leaky donut is that it does leak, and people exit our industry at quite an alarming rate. But the work that I'm doing, and if you were here for the Encoders workshop, the work that folks like Barbara and Katie are doing, so many people doing wonderful work with kids and adults right now, trying to get people back into the donut. And that's kind of what this talk is really about. People might encounter some of these, these assumptions and thoughts and ideas, but there are things that we can all do to combat it. So anyway, leaky donut. And that brings me to sort of the meta issue that I encounter quite a bit in teaching adults, which is I've come to kind of think of this as the possibilities problem. And there's this really affecting blog post that Julia Horvath wrote about a year ago, and it's about women in tech. It's about her experience. And she said this thing that just really kind of stopped me in my tracks when I read it, which was, I didn't grow up thinking I could do anything I wanted to. And every time I read it, I feel really overwhelmed, because it so matches what I experience when I go into workshops and teach women to learn how to code for the first time. And this is a picture we took in a workshop teaching adults about algorithms, and they were doing a pen and pencil exercise, trying to figure out how to get from the airport to home using a bunch of different transportation methods. But as they were going through that, what they said afterward was that they finally felt confident that they could explain what an algorithm was, that before they had come, they'd never really thought about what an algorithm was and also how that related to programming in any way and what it might mean to create their own algorithms. And that's really powerful transformation for them. So now I'm going to go into all the reasons why I think K through 12 teachers in particular are a place where we can affect culture change at a pretty massive scale. The Young Coders Workshop, I think, is a great example of doing this, where we're just going out there and directly interacting with kids and showing them what's possible, and I think it's a wonderful thing, and I wish that we could do it everywhere all the time. The great thing about public education in the United States, and a lot of my comments really are going to be about the United States. There's lots of interesting stuff, for example, going on in India right now, where they've just introduced Python as a language that can be taught at the university level instead of Java. There's great stuff happening in other countries, but most of my comments today will be focused on the United States. But anyway, if we could get more K through 12 teachers doing computer science, doing computational literacy, I think it would change a lot for us. So one of the fundamental problems that we face with kids is that they think math not that they think, math just makes them anxious. And there are a couple reasons, there's some fundamental reasons why this happens so early. And one of them is timed math tests. And this starts as early as the first grade. There's research about first graders. This particular study there was an article that was just published this month, 2014. And this is a comment from a second grader. After taking a timed test, this is what they said: I'm terrible at math. And when it starts that early, it just, it kind of snowballs. So one of the things that would be very helpful for teachers at that level is to have less pressure to have these timed tests, to have these performance measurements of, math at such an early age. Because really what we want to be doing at that point is exploring and helping kids understand the beauty and the art that is there in math, much less than having to perform that they can add or multiply or subtract or whatever in a strictly timed environment. And what's great is that, I think it's Jill Baylor, she and many other people are starting to publish now peer-reviewed research that demonstrates how we can teach math in a way that doesn't increase math anxiety. And then I have a link there if you're interested in that, in reading that study and seeing what they have to say about that. Another attitude that's out there pretty early with kids, probably a lot of the research that I've seen is for 6th grade to 12th grade, that computer science is boring or irrelevant to their lives. And the problem with that attitude is that 98% of computer science majors are exposed in some way to computer science before college. So if kids think that it's irrelevant to them that early, they probably are not going to become computer science majors because they just won't ever bother to take any of the classes. And then the other compounding unfortunate thing is that also most women who get computer science degrees are exposed to it before college. And to kind of give you a sense of the scale of what we're up against here, in 2012, about 25,000 students took the AP Computer Science class, which is, respectable number, and it was actually almost a 15% increase over the number that took it in 2011. But unfortunately, when you compare it to the number of tests taken for AP Calculus, which is you have to usually take 4 years of math in the United States to get to the point where you would be ready for an AP Calculus test, you can see that we're working against some pretty significant numbers there. There's not a lot of kids that are taking that AP computer science test. So we're starting way behind. So I talk a lot about PyLadies. Like I said, I'm mostly teaching adults, but I think that PyLadies is relevant for a number of reasons. And one of them is this attitude, which is also fairly prevalent and discussed quite a bit in Unlocking the Clubhouse and Stuck in the Shallow End. There's a woman, Jane Margolis, who's done a great deal of research into this, published some really great short readable books about her research into this, and can kind of explain the reasons why kids think that computer science in the United States is only for white boys. And the impact of that, which a lot of you have probably heard something like this, and you've probably also heard that in free and open source software, there's only maybe 1, 2, or 3% are women. But the compounding factor here, the leaky donut factor, is that 10 years in, only 58% of women choose to stay in the industry, while 85% of men do. So I think that PyLadies is another compounding important effort to try to keep women in our industry if they manage to get there in the first place. So the last kind of school-related, K through 12 related issue that I wanted to talk about to hopefully motivate you to go out there and get in touch with teachers is that this idea that there are no jobs in free and open source software. So you might get all the way through, decide that computer science is fun and exciting and it's for you, but then in the end you're like, oh, well, I'm never going to get a job anyway, so I probably shouldn't finish my degree. So there's actually some research into these kinds of attitudes. A lot of them are really specific to IT, so kind of the bigger, broader IT industry, as opposed to free and open source software, but they are very related attitudes, I think. And this set of research was a survey of about 6,000 students in 5 different European countries. In a lot of instances, what they found was that the teachers and the parents both were really poorly educated about what the opportunities were. They just really had no idea what these jobs were like. And one attitude that I think is particularly relevant to free and open source software is this idea that the IT jobs aren't there to help people. So only 55% of girls and only 40% of parents and teachers believed that IT jobs were going to help people improve the world in any way. And that's really sad, right? Like, 'cause that's what a lot of us, is not everyone, of course, but a lot of us in this room, that's what motivated us to get involved in free and open source software in the first place, because we thought we were going to make an impact on the world and change things for the better. And teachers and parents, like, they really have no idea that that's the case, which is too bad. So it's my belief that to effectively change this, it's a culture problem. And it's a much wider world issue. To do it, I think that we have to intervene at a lot of different ages, at a lot of different career stages, at all socioeconomic levels. And I think it's possible to do that with teachers because they span a lot of those barriers and come in contact with parents and kids in a way that, at least for me, for my part, I work for Mozilla. I'm coming from a place of extreme privilege and an awesome air-conditioned office that I get to go to every day. And I don't come in contact with a lot of the people that might believe that there were no jobs in free and open source software every day. But teachers certainly do. So I've done a bunch of other computer science and education talks, and I link to them here, which you're welcome to see. And I go into a lot of detail about Common Core, about the state of computer science education in the U.S. There's a lot of great information out there from the ACM, from the Computer Science Teachers Association, stuff like that. And you can check all that stuff out there if you're interested in that. And now I'm just going to go into some very practical things that I think that we all can do right away to get involved with more teachers. I think a really amazing model for advocacy comes from Dina Perot. The program's called iUrban Teen, and there's a link right there to the website for it. Excuse me. And basically what this program does is it focuses on African American and Latino kids, bringing them in and exposing them to programming for the first time. And the big innovation there from her is she brings the parents and the kids together at the same time. And then once they kind of come to this day-long workshop on a weekend, she splits them up. And she takes the parents off into one room, and they get to talk to a bunch of IT execs or programmers or whatever about the state of the industry, the fact that IT jobs are not, in fact, being wholesale outsourced outside of the United States or in Canada right now. But anyway, this is a very prevalent idea, a myth in the United States, that you can't find an IT job. And it seems very strange to me because, man, like, we can't hire fast enough, right? Like, we can't train people fast enough to hire them. But there still are a lot of people that believe that the jobs aren't out there. So she takes the parents aside, gets them to talk with industry leaders about the state of it, and then takes the kids into another room and just shows them cool stuff, does demos, plays with robots, cool things that the kids would be into. And the great thing about this program is that 75% of the kids who have attended these have stayed involved in programming in some way. So it's a pretty dramatic impact in a really important community. Another thing that I think would have a big impact is teaching computational thinking to all ages of people. And if you haven't heard of this before, Jeanette Wing is kind of seen as like the mother of the current computational thinking movement. And this is a big, long thing. I probably shouldn't have put this slide in here even, but I summarized it. And how I think of it is as it's humans harnessing algorithms and automation to solve problems, make lives easier, make the world better. And it's really focusing on that algorithms and automation piece and how humans interact with machines as opposed to just thinking about it in terms of math or programming. There's a great set of curriculum called csunplug.org that gives lessons for how to teach computational thinking without using computers. There's also a talk from the the Python Education Summit that just happened. Somebody gave a talk on how to teach computational thinking using Python. There's a lot of great resources out there. This is something that I think it would be really great if we all would teach our families, which might sound a little weird, but I mean, I don't know about you, but my family doesn't really know what I do. Like, I'm actually, for a living, I work on databases, like I'm a data architect, and I, write a lot of SQL and design data structures and data stores and stuff like that. And if I could teach my parents just a little bit more about what it is that I do, and my brother and sister for that matter, it would, I don't know, we'd probably have a lot more interesting Christmas conversations. So those were kind of like the other two things were kind of like these meta ideas. One direct action thing that you can do is find a local teacher. And fortunately, code.org has put together a wonderful resource in the United States. I think that there is some information outside the US, but in the US it's really great. So if you put in your city and state at this URL, you will get a list of local high schools, sometimes middle schools, sometimes elementary schools that have after-school programs, are teaching CS, full-on CS classes. Like in my community, I found out that this one teacher, Chris Bartlow, had a 4-year computer science program in this high school, which is just amazing. It's pretty unheard of in the US. But anyway, I ended up meeting 8 different teachers this way, and it's just a fantastic resource. And you can gives contact information for the schools there, and the way that I did it, and I in previous talks that I've done on this, I have like a template email that you're welcome just to copy and plug in your own information and see if you can get a teacher to respond to you. Almost every teacher that I contacted sent me an email back and wanted me to come and meet with them, which was just wonderful. And then one thing that you can offer to teachers that they tend to want is for you just to talk about your job to the classroom. It's super relevant to the kids. They don't often get a lot of contact unless they have a parent that's already in the industry with people who are currently in the industry, and they love to hear about what it is that you do. Of course, you gotta make your presentation age appropriate. But what I tend to do is just start out talking about a problem that I solve in my work. And for me, this is, the most basic level of how I describe it is that sometimes Firefox crashes, right? And almost everybody in the room can relate to a piece of software crashing on them. And I tell the kids that I try to help figure out why that happens and then help other people make Firefox crash less next time. And here's how. And then I can show them either, the variety of tools that I use. Now I get to show them, a Firefox phone crashing. I know there's like all sorts of neat stuff that you can do there to help kids understand what it's like to work in the industry. Another great thing to do is have a look at the after-school programs that are out there. The Computer Science Teachers Association is a great resource for this. There are local chapters. I know that, I don't think Barbara's here, but she's gotten involved in her local chapter in Austin, Texas. And most major cities have a local chapter at this point. Your local tech association might be an option. So in Oregon, we have the Tech Association of Oregon, and they're very active in Portland, particularly with the teachers. There's also just industry affiliates. So my first job out of college was at Intel, and they were deeply involved in mentoring kids at the local high schools. And so often the larger companies will have these structured mentoring programs, and it's actually usually not too hard to get involved in those, even if you don't work for that giant company. And specifically in Oregon, here's 3 programs that I've had some contact with or had friends participate in. And you can, unfortunately there aren't a lot of like big name programs. Like in the UK, there are some, but in the United States, there aren't as many that I've come across. But in Oregon, we've got these 3 that are really great, and they are always looking for volunteers. Another thing people might be sort of interested in is lobbying. And code.org, again, has some great starter resources here. And you can check that out at code.org promote. The Computer Science Teachers Association also has a vast array of resources related to lobbying. It's a little harder to kind of crack into, but just starting with their research papers and then looking at their suggested actions in those research papers is a great way to get involved in that. Another thing that people sort of forget about is professional development for teachers. So I had the privilege of going and actually keynoting the Computer Science Teachers Association last year. It was me and the guy who started code.org, which was just a completely surreal experience. But I got to talk about open source and how I really wish that there were more open source people in contact with teachers, kind of the same sort of theme as talking about today. But one thing that teacher after teacher asked me is they're like, so I want to teach a class that uses Python. So what's the cool set of tools that I should give to these kids? And so I gave her some suggestions. I was like, well, get together Flask, teach these kids how to deploy something on Heroku. They'll be super stoked, and they'll have a website and everything. But the teachers really would love to have somebody come in and give them, a tutorial on how to do that. And you can offer that. And there are professional development opportunities, mostly during the summertime. But you can offer that to the school, go in for a day, and just give them some ideas for teaching the kids, or just for their own edification. And finally, I really want to say teaching adults has completely changed my life. I love it. Being involved in PyLadies is by far, I like Python. It's great. But being involved in PyLadies is really one of my favorite parts of the Python community. And with adults, you learn so much, so many things that you can then share with your new teacher friends that you can go out and find. And I think it really helps improve this first-time entry experience that people have with free and open source software. And there's a lot of opportunities to that. PyLadies, of course, does all these workshops. A lot of times libraries will have programs like the Multnomah County Library, where I'm at, has this thing called Cyber Seniors. And you can also just do DIY workshops and just invite a few of your friends. So there's my list of stuff to do. And I'm happy to, I've actually done most of these things too, so I'm happy to answer questions about specific things if you have any. And I just want to close with, I really think the local connections, being in touch with your local community, are the way that we change the larger culture. And like I said, you can find this wonderful resource of local teachers just by going to code.org and searching for your city. So I hope you all do that. And thank you very much for listening.
Okay, we do have 5 minutes for questions, so if you'd like to go to the microphone, please. It's just over there.
Hidden.
It's way back here in the back. Hi, my name's Matt. I'm from Seattle, and I'm kind of stuck on how the local middle schools and high school in my area are stuck on Scratch and BYOB and other kind of graphical tools to teach that way when they're not making the leap into having kids actually cut code. And I wonder if you have an opinion on whether that can be as effective, or if we're really missing something by not teaching keystrokes.
That's a good question. I mean, it certainly is a barrier if they want to write Python, right? Like Scratch it doesn't really help you too much. I mean, the more important thing, the most important thing from like a long-term perspective is that they get comfortable with the idea of creating things that they share and use and for themselves. Like the act of creation is the most important thing. I've seen a lot of Scratch programs that get kids to the point where they are super excited about getting on a computer, screwing around with it, breaking things, and being okay with that. And if it breaks down that anxiety, I think it's great. But yeah, I mean, as far as like promoting the type of programming that's going to get you into a computer science program, that's going to get you into the industry, I don't know. I don't know if Scratch on its own without the second kind of level really does that. I haven't seen any evidence that it does anyway.
Hi. So a lot of what you've been, this is kind of an open-ended question. A lot of what you've been talking about has been focused more on an urban context. Like I grew up in borderline rural Randolph County, North Carolina. Like back when I only got into programming because my dad used to run a VBS back in the day.
Awesome.
And like when I was learning Python, I was pretty sure that I was the only person in Randolph County who knew what Python was. So what
you probably were.
Yeah. So I guess the question is like, how can you do this sort of thing in a kind of rural or borderline rural environment like that, where there's not really much of a tech industry or tech people to, I guess, help?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I grew up in Montana, out in the middle of nowhere. I was lucky enough to have a grandfather who was a TV repairman and a ham operator, and an uncle that was really into hobbyist computer assembly. So I'm probably not the best person I'm probably not very qualified to talk about that sort of thing. But what I will say about the experience in Montana was that the important thing was having a place. And it was just because the resources were so scarce and the kids didn't have computers in their homes. And this is kind of changing, I think. I think it's much more likely that a kid's going to have access to some kind of computer in the home. But for, the kids that were in my high school, most of them didn't. And so we had a computer lab, and we had teachers and parents that volunteered to staff that lab after school. And that was how I wasn't part of that. I was like, oh, that's scary, like I wasn't into that in high school. I really didn't get into computer anything until I was in college. But for the kids that were into it, the teachers and the parents provided a place, and that was what enabled them to figure anything out, so yeah, that's as much expertise as I have in that area. I think definitely for kids that are in rural areas, being able to access like wider resources is really important. And there are some things like the Florida Virtual School. There's probably two big programs, Florida Virtual School being one, and the other one is slipping my mind at the moment. But you can take online classes. They're for credit that are recognized in a lot of states, not all states, but a lot of states recognize that for credit, and kids can get access to coursework early on that way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, my name's Elliot from Trinket, and I was just wondering if there's anything that you think is like a glaring, hole that we as a community can build, curriculum or tools of what, starting to think about is like the teaching stack. Like, what do you need as a teacher? You reach out to a local teacher. What can you give them as far as resources or tools to use?
Yeah, it's really context dependent. I feel like in a little way you sort of like gave me like the most awesome like setup there for that, because I have this idea that we should have a teaching section of the python.org website. And I don't want to call it education, like I want to call it teaching, and I want to find a way of getting K through 12 teachers and university professors and stuff like that to vet that material and kind of put together a set of resources. But anyway, like, so that's one aspect of it. As far as like the tooling, I think it really depends on the resources that the school tends to have. So unfortunately, much like in the way that the PyLadies workshops really have to tailor all of their material to what the local community is able to bring to the workshop, I think it's similar. You kind of have to look at what the school has access to, because some schools, they have like awesome like Linux workstations. Others, you know, they've got like Windows 95. Like it's pretty diverse and difficult environment out there. So I would say have a look at what they've got, and then, you know, see if you can create either VMs or, you know, a package installer, and then blog about it so that other people know that you made it. There are lots of efforts right now to create packages that work more universally. This is a huge problem for the workshop groups. The installers, you know, pip install whatever, it's kind of sketchy. And, you know, the more documentation that we build up about it, the better the installers will get.
Awesome, thanks.
I'm afraid. Well. I'm afraid we do have to call time now, so could we please thank Selena?
Talk to you, Marina. Thank you.